All right, I see folks joining. Ooh, can you see my video? Okay, great. So thank you so much for joining our webinar today about how to stand out in your job in a remote world and how to promote internal mobility. My name is Christina Giordano. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I'm the Partnerships and Community Manager here at AllVoices. For folks who aren't familiar, AllVoices is an employee feedback management platform, and we're really here to ensure that culture of trust, psychological safety, and provide that platform to share anonymous feedback from things like harassment, bias, and culture issues, and share that feedback directly with company leadership. And we collect that anonymized data to share with company leaders so they can ultimately take action and ensure folks are seen and heard. With AllVoices, companies can use that real-time data to make systemic changes. To set the stage for today's conversation, we know that company culture and building a workplace that employees feel a part of is really important for retention and the innovation of a company. In our state of employee feedback study in 2021, 41% of employees have shared that they left a job because they didn't feel listened to, that two-way communication. And another study of 32 million LinkedIn profiles showed that employees who are promoted within 3 years of joining the company were 70% more likely to stay on board. And those that made a lateral move at that same company as well were around 62% more likely to stay, whereas folks who were not promoted, didn't change jobs, or weren't challenged only had around a 45% chance of staying. So having that conversation is important. So I would also like to pass it to our panelists to introduce themselves. If you want to share a little bit about yourself, including your pronouns, role, and the work you do at your company, and then we'll dive into the meat and potatoes of the conversation. Michelle, if you want to kick it off.
Hi, everyone. I'm Michelle. I go by she, her pronouns, and I'm a career and leadership coach in my own private practice. And I also run Aspire Talent. We are a boutique HR consultancy for early stage startups, helping with all things people and talent. I'm excited to be here and share with you guys some of the knowledge and insight that I have from my end.
Awesome. And then we'll go Nadia, Alysa, and then Will.
Great. Hey, everyone. It's great to be here. I'm Nadia Vatalidis. I'm VP of People at Promote. I go by the pronouns she, her. And I work for a company that is really big on the future of work. And ultimately, our product and our company builds entities around the world for all organizations that wants to grow globally to be able to hire there. And we do all the rest, payroll, all the compliance related things, and making sure that we unblock hiring and unblock great opportunities for rural talent. Over to you, Alysa.
Hi, everybody. My name is Alysa. I'm People Operations Specialist at Simple Mills. You might have seen us in one of your grocery stores. We are reinventing that center aisle and rethinking the way that we all snack. So very happy to be here. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And as People Ops Specialist, I support recruitment, onboarding, employee engagement, and talent development. So really partnering with our leaders and our people to see how we can continue to build Simple Mills and our ways of working.
Hi, everyone. My name is Will, he, him, his. I am really delighted to be here. Since my first panel, actually, I found really hard to introduce myself because when people ask me where I'm from everywhere and nowhere. I was actually born in Chicago. I was raised in Taipei, Taiwan. I studied in Vancouver, Canada. And then now I live this beautiful La La Land, Los Angeles. And that's why you can hear my Chinese and Canadian accents. So if I'm speaking too fast, feel free to slow me down, everyone here. And about 15 years ago, I was working in a lab analyzing samples as a chemical engineer. Now, fast forward 15 years later, I am leading our performance engagement team, really building and developing our amazing people and culture at a lifestyle company called FabFitFun in Hollywood. And a very linear career path, right? From engineering to HR. If you buy me a drink, I will fill in the 15 years in between, or feel free to check me out on LinkedIn.
Incredible. Thank you. Thank you all for being here. I want to start out by asking a question around the definition of remote work. It's in the title about how to stand out and promote internal mobility. A lot of us have not pictured ourselves in a remote first world before, last year or 18 months ago, I should say now. So what does it look like in practice, and what is it really not? There was an interesting kind of article around employee trust and surveillance about how some companies are really exploring productivity tools of screen time and when your mouse is moving and if your Slack icon is green. Maybe not the best way to do things, but kicking off, Alysa, what is remote work to you?
That's a great question. I'm excited to start. And I think I often start with what it's not, because I think our minds naturally go to, I'm near my work materials, I need to be on present. There's no reason for me to not be emailing right back. It's on my phone. I work from home. And actually, that is not remote working. Working is still working. There's still a separation at some point in your day of, and I'm done, and I'm not available anymore, and I'm doing whatever we do on our own time. And so it is not 24/7 availability. It is not rapid fire response. It is not project turnaround of tomorrow. It is still this engagement thoughtfully in your day with your work. And there are sometimes like various hours that teams always hold meetings, but I would say based on what it's not, it is important for organizations to establish what it then means. What are our expectations for working hours? What are our expectations for what we're starting to call rules of engagement? How do we communicate, at what time and at what cadence, and establishing this for people so they're not left just wondering what they're actually supposed to be doing.
Yeah, thanks, Alysa, for that. I want to add on to it of like what it could be as well once a company starts thinking about some of those practices. And like, it's not 24/7 work. It's being also intentional about like some meetings not having to turn your camera on, or taking a walking meeting, or being able to pop out of the day to run an errand, but still being available. I think organizations are rethinking what it means to work, and like in this integrated place where your home is your work, and those lines can easily get blurred. So being able to establish those boundaries, communicate those boundaries, and also recognize that it's no longer just like bums in seats and that means productivity. That's not the case. And I think having to operate in this place of the pandemic really rapidly, when all the offices shut down and people had to really figure out how to work, it really put that on the forefront that there isn't just one way of showing up and working and being productive. So I think it's an interesting era and a future of work that we're entering in, and everyone's still figuring it out, but each organization has their own unique style, and it's up to them to really define it and to communicate some of those smaller cultural pieces to their employees.
I'd love to just add one thing I was thinking through, Michelle, when we're thinking about defining it, being mindful not to define on the outliers. So I think a lot of times companies are like, how do I make sure my people are working? And it starts with trust. When you hired them, they had the skill set, the knowledge base, you could see how they would add to your company culture, ways of working. So it should start with that trust because you've done your due diligence in the hiring process. Breaking of that trust is actually not even in many cases like statistically significant. And so when that happens, then it's up to the organization to have one-to-one conversations, not to change or establish a policy on what I would consider actually an outlier in most situations.
Right. That is so key. Like the trust piece that the individual can still be a high performer while not having to be managed and monitored and responding to emails like at that minute, and trusting that they have the skills, expertise to get the job done, which is first and foremost the most important reason of why they were hired, as opposed to FaceTime, plugging away and churning at all hours of the day. Yeah.
I want to kind of build on that as well in terms of trust is pivotal to the foundation of your relationship with the company. And that often boils down to kind of your individual relationships. Michelle, to your point, when you were talking about optics and butts and seats, often your butt was in the seat because you wanted to show your manager that you are, this is your screen, this is what you're working on, and you're plugging away, putting in the hours. And now that we have kind of this remote first world, or a lot of people are taking on this approach, you want to communicate that to your manager. But how do we really think about redesigning or rethinking how to train people managers to build that trust with folks, to really model that behavior, and to also from their perspective, like you take a lot of cues from your manager as well. And I think FaceTime is also an interesting layer too that you're not getting a little bit of as well. What are your thoughts on that? Let's start with Will and then Nadia.
Yeah, definitely, Christina. I think, really add to Alysa, what Alysa and Michelle talk about trust, right? I think that's key to developing our people managers. And a lot of them, I will say, some of them, it's their first time managing a remote workforce, people working from home. And before the pandemic, a lot of our managers attended, for example, a 3-month manager essential training, a program that we put together, and the manager come in person training. And then when I was looking at, for example, one of our people managers, she attended a training before the pandemic, and I noticed throughout the years, the past almost 2 years, she hasn't improved her people management skills. Specifically, she was struggling how to manage people when they're not in the office and managing through Zoom, right? It's becoming a challenge for her, and I think for a lot of managers as well. And I noticed that specifically around feedback, she's still not open to feedback, especially during remote work, because we don't see people in person, especially in that part of the our world. And she didn't create a safe space for her team to provide feedback through Zoom, through a virtual world. So in my coaching with her one-on-one conversation, I noticed that she had like some blind spots. So she's not open to her feedback when her direct report provided feedback to her through Zoom. She was still thinking about her own ideas. She still show up and do the work for her teams. So there's, this trust is not, built and developed for, between the team and herself. So since then, we have incorporated some personalized coaching and reflection to help her. So it's not just attending now a virtual workshop, but really helping them build one-on-one relationship, coaching relationship with our expert coach at the company, as well as a lot of reflection activities to help them develop. So it's really different interventions and tools we build in to redesign how we think about training and development for our mid-management, our people managers. And so really help them to do that. And then they can model those for their team members. So they know how to coach and mentor their team members. So it's really that the key is to, a lot of self-reflection, personalized coaching to support these managers to become successful, so they can embody those behaviors to really, help their teams to become successful.
Yeah, to build on that, Will, I think, coming from a remote first company, so we were remote well ahead of the pandemic. We're never going to have any offices in the world. There's a huge difference between remote forced and remote first. And if you're onboarding amazing people leaders that's never done remote first before, they're sort of still stuck in this, one day we're going to go back to some weird normality of before, and that no longer exists, right? And so I think a lot of people managers that even join remote, it all starts with onboarding. So Will is correct, like it starts very early on in that journey, and we have managerial onboarding. So we've built out people manager onboarding from our literally mid-management and up, and this sort of keeps leveling up as someone gets added at direct or VP level at remote. But something I've really discovered during a remote first world is the number one skill to learn is to be self-enabled. And so when you have a people manager that's not self-enabled, how are they supposed to self-enable their team? How are they supposed to mirror that that ability to do things when other people are sleeping. We have people in 50 different countries over probably 18 different time zones by now. And so that means a lot happens when you're sleeping. So we also lean on this huge sort of asynchronous communication model where I don't need to respond to a Slack message right away. If your people leaders start expecting that of their team because it's habits that formed before this organization, those habits tend to stick and the boundaries just gets blurred really quickly. So I think it all starts with really good onboarding program, making sure you lean into practices of self-enablement. And then the next one is the art of discovery. I am quite obsessed with documentation. And so if everything's not written down, how is someone else supposed to find something? So if someone has a team and they're across 5 different time zones, and this people manager needs to help them make decisions, but something isn't written down, there's no process documentation, there's no documentation on next steps or how to do a promotion or how to, I'm trying to think about something very operational, like how to reply to vendors or how to engage vendors. What is the vendor review process? If you don't know those basic things, you have to wait until someone wakes up, right? So I think also the art of discovery and learning how to search really well in documentation instead of memorizing. So I think that's key for me in terms of my people leadership. There's many other things. One key thing I'll throw in there is if you're a people manager in a remote organization, when you have those one-on-one conversations, you cannot see someone's body language when, as you usually did while walking in the office. So it's crucial to start those one-on-one calls by checking in on how someone else is doing. I've seen a lot of companies just like go straight into the boardroom mode, in a Zoom call, and it's no longer necessary. You can start by just going like, hey, Christina, how's Lola, your pet, or whatever the case may be? How's it going? You mentioned, something was up this weekend. Is everything okay? Making sure that you check how someone's generally emotionally doing and showing up for work, and then offering the necessary support or getting them the next necessary support from your people team or mental health program, etc. And especially since we're still stuck in a pandemic. So, we're not out of this yet. And I don't think a lot of people, leaders really realize what their employees and teams are going through.
Yeah, I would love to add on to that as well, just kind of combining what Will and Nadia you said, especially when coming from an environment where you're so used to having face-to-face time and just that quick water cooler conversation, and you don't have that anymore, being able to build rapport virtually. And when working with individuals from like different time zones and not necessarily having that quick response rate that you would have by like walking over to their desk, leaders should be more mindful of like, what are all the thoughts that really stem up and occur in their mind when they're sending a flurried email and they don't get a response, and they tend to spin and can maybe even assume the worst scenario of like it hasn't happened. So I think that's really where it goes back to what you were saying, Nadia, of having documentation and like training up people so they know and they can be self-sufficient and not necessarily spin out because they don't have that information instantaneously. And just going back to the further point of what Alysa was saying, like having trust that things are taken care of, like just because someone doesn't respond instantly or you don't have that instant gratification, that the employee has it handled. So I think these are all different ways of starting to think when removing that layer of, that comfort when you see someone in person and like bringing it into a virtual environment.
What's been one of my favorite things, and we all have talked about this, and I'm sure you guys have talked about it in meetings, the humanization of our employees in regards to like someone's cat walks across the screen, a dog pops up. In my house, I have tiny humans and you can regularly hear them. It's interesting because one of our favorite things about what has transpired in this understanding of who people are, why are we not humanizing our meetings? We are jumping in business, and only like acknowledging the human aspects if they happen to interrupt us. And yet that's still one of our top things that we've all heard in meetings anecdotally. You can see in different reports that people are seeing that like connectivity. I think it's important as you're in a to Nadia's point, remote first, not remote forced. Force feels like get on the Zoom, business, get off the Zoom or Teams or Google Meet, wherever you're meeting. And instead, 2 minutes. How are you? How was your weekend? You heard someone scream, we're good. We're just 2.5 and excited for life. Like, have that moment that you would more naturally have had if you were walking into an office, into a meeting room.
I think we're all connected. And like Alysa, you read my mind. I was gonna say that exactly, like being human and exactly 100%. You reminded me, I have a 5-year-old son. Like just right before the pandemic, my son was coming all the time. Now he's at school, but it's just like, it's very interesting experience. And even like now, like you to your point, like how are you, right? In the beginning of the meeting, I noticed like creating that space is so important. Not just like, I noticed like when people ask me, how are you? The first I would say good. But then if they ask me again, like a few seconds later, I will actually start to talk about my real emotion, like what's happening, right? So that's something I've noticed, like really not just superficially, like how are you, but like, how are you really doing? And then creating that space, not just jump into the business. Love that.
Yeah, and before we move on, we have this rule that we don't apologize for interruptions and disruptions at remote. And so what's awesome, like if a significant other, pet, child runs into the call, by just normalizing it completely means no one has severe anxiety because their little 2-year-old or 5-year-old or cat or dog, etc., or significant other is running past. It's just completely normal because we are in our homes. And if you expect people to work in their homes and be authentic, then it comes with the territory and the risk. And so, yeah, thanks.
I think that's a really good example of operationalizing, putting in systems or non-negotiables and making it kind of a less barrier to entry there for interruptions to happen, and you feel kind of less bad about, someone coming in or, something happening outside of this little Zoom box here. Do you feel like people managers, decision makers, leaders, like C-suite executives have more of a responsibility to actively build the trust and model that behavior than individuals who are just starting or, team members as well?
Yeah, I really like it when someone like a CEO tells someone, like, please don't apologize when there's a 5-year-old sitting on their lap or a tiny baby, literally like reaching for the laptop and AirPods, etc. So I just really like leaders advocating for things like that, because I think it empowers others and it mirrors that behavior that you need in this environment. But there's so many other things, right? If your leaders are also I nearly want to say like have a flexible schedule and not online all the time, that's the type of mirroring that you need as well. So if you as a people leader are telling people, hey, like we have a flexible environment, and we don't do long hours, or you need to really have a life outside of work, but you're always online, then you're certainly sending that message, right? And so learning how to also build boundaries. I have my calendar publicly available across the entire remote. And I can tell you now, it's jam-packed with skateboard sessions with the kids, soccer visits, family time, work blocks, and like, do not schedule, and if, or please ask before scheduling, I need this work block, right? And I think, again, that also normalizes the idea of, I do grocery shopping at this time on a Wednesday, or, I have a hairdresser appointment in the week. I cannot go on a Saturday. It's too busy, and due to COVID, I prefer going when my hairdresser is quiet. And I think like integrating your work into your life, and as a people leader and a manager and an executive, really showing that you're also doing that, normalizes that for every individual contributor in your organization. And funny enough, I find people so much more productive when they have the flexibility to do what they like during their days. So they'll do something in 5 minutes that usually probably took an hour.
There's that phrase we come across. I feel like I sometimes I'm walking cliche of phrases, but work smarter, not harder. And we say this, and yet to Nadia's point, do we actually act upon it? Because the idea that a number of clicks or constant presentation and 24/7 availability means you're actually being productive. But how many times if you're actually, let's say you are currently working at that pace, how many times a day do you even in your own time find yourself, your mind is wandering, you're overtired, you put a deck together and you look at it the next day and you're like, I don't know what any of this means, like none of this is making sense, right? If we don't have those natural cadences of shutdown, then our minds don't have that rest they need to come with the productivity that goes into other areas of not just like producing great work, but producing great work, feeling good yourself. And then in that production of all things greatness, or at least many things greatness, you'll start to see leaders will recognize good people, leaders recognize good work. And if you can't put good work forward, that is hindering your opportunity to be recognized as someone who has that like potential or something, along those lines.
Yeah, I just also want to add here that leaders really do model the behavior that they are willing to tolerate and intolerate. So if a leader is coming in and they're just boardroom mode and that's the cadence of how they set their tone for the meetings, then that expectation flows through to the entire organization. Or if they are, or if they do have an expectation that people have to respond 2-3 minutes after an email has been received, then those are the subtle things that team members will pick up on. So I think when adjusting to the remote work, leaders and organizations really have to embed and understand how do they want to come across and how can they hold themselves firm. Otherwise, they'll just be operating really unconsciously and falling into habits that they don't want to perpetuate. So it's really kind of taking that step back to say, am I really enabling like a remote first culture? Am I being like trusting of my employees? Do I have that level of respect for their personal time versus their work time? And it really starts with the leader.
Yeah, and second, I believe like leaders really play a vital role there when they role model, right? Nadia talked about role modeling, like modeling those behaviors. I remember one of the leaders mentioned like, hey, we want to take time off during the pandemic. Feel free to take a week off, a couple of days off. And then their team come back and like they couldn't take days off because if they take 3 days off, they come back with, multiply like 3 times of work. They still need to do a lot of work. Then they start burning out. So like there's just this, and the leaders are not taking time off. So like why? So they're not modeling those behaviors and people feel stressed and like they shouldn't do that because their leaders are not doing that. And I have seen great leaders who really take 2 weeks off to Europe during the pandemic. Like, yes, teams go take time off and the leaders start taking 2 weeks off. And like, it is okay. You don't need to respond to your email within 24 hours. Take time and in the evening, spend time with your family, right? And when they come back, take few days to respond to your emails. I've seen this contrast, real life examples of leaders doing, really modeling that, and that created the trust that the team started to say, yes, I want to stay with this company. I want to stay with this manager because they model those behaviors versus someone say take times off and they cannot take time. It's just like very super, like on the surface level.
I think modeling that behavior is really important. And for people managers, we're talking about how to stand out, how to build trust with your team, lead with vulnerability. And Alysa, you mentioned that good people managers know when their team is doing great work. And even if I know that's true, sometimes I do have this, I don't know if I would call it imposter syndrome, but this thought of, should I be telling my manager everything I'm doing every single day so he, knows I'm being productive? Because I do want to grow in my career path. So I want to flip the kind of narrative a little bit to talk about individual contributors and if there's anything different that, we need to do as team members to manage up, communicate that you potentially want to move internally or communicate that you are doing great work. Do we have different norms or ways of communicating that in a kind of remote first world?
I can jump in.
Go for it, Michelle. Yeah.
I was going to say, like, it becomes even more of an important emphasis for people to advocate for themselves when they aren't getting that face-to-face time. Like, it's already challenging for folks to advocate for themselves, to, raise their hand and really reach for and communicate outwards what they want. And it becomes even more of a challenge when you're not having that level of depth, maybe not having that level of depth with your colleagues or with people around. So it is on the responsibility of the individual to be more forward of where they want to drive their career and where the conversations they want to have, and making it known. And I think that can be a developmental area, especially if someone feels more reserved or maybe introverted and is shy about coming forward to that. So I think that's how to solve it from an individual side. And then from a managerial side, it's like, being conscious of, like, are you having these conversations? Are you embedding these types of questions, or ability for the employee to come up about what they want? Because we can get so geared into, like, what do I need to do, that they forget. So there's a way to systemically build that into the process. But it really does start, like, everyone's in control of their own career, and it just becomes even more important for people to advocate for themselves.
Yeah, to build on that, Michelle, if someone is completely self-enabled and trusted, and there's great documentation, usually even for an introverted person, the structure is so much easier to have those conversations, right? So something small that a people team or a people leader or even a CEO of a tiny startup could do is just have templates available for a growth plan, enablement plan, or development. In some organizations, it's a personal development plan, etc., available that anyone can access. A lot of companies put this behind some sort of managerial block. It really shouldn't be. Anyone at the company should know how does those conversations happen? How do you have a growth conversation with your manager? And I think as an individual contributor, Michelle is right. Like, you have to take ownership of your own career. It's very, very hard. If there's a structure available for that, it makes that conversation easier. And I think as part of that, it's also totally okay to say to your leader, hey, I'm thinking about this in the next 3 or 6 or 12 months, and being that direct in terms of how you're thinking, and coming to those conversations with, my plan is to attend an accelerator course or a program in whatever that field is, or read these 2 books and listen to these 5 podcasts. And then I want to revisit this conversation with you, right? To show what they are doing to either channel their career into another direction, or moving to that next level, and what that would look like. Also asking for clarity of, like, what the path is. What does succession look like? Some organizations, especially in remote work, hasn't figured out how to have succession discussions. Many have, or they've just adopted what they had. But I think, it's totally okay to ask and say, like, hey, what does succession look like? Or what does a senior role look like in my career path? What is the expectations going to be like? I would like to explore that. And once you have that, then maybe ending that conversation to say, I'm thinking about this in 3 to 6 months. How do you think about it? Do you agree? Are we on the same page? Because that gives both of them an opportunity to share a little bit of feedback as well.
One of the things that, like, Nadia and Michelle were touching on, and Christina, kind of goes back to your question too, particularly in a Zoom world, there is a difference in sharing and monitoring. So you, as the individual contributor and advocating yourself, sharing successes or how you've overcome challenges, particularly as Nadia has mentioned, and documenting upon that, very important, especially as you start to think about how you're fitting into, like, career pathing, and are you ready, and how do you know if you're ready? So there's sharing, and then there's monitoring. So monitoring is, I think, where people mistake that for sharing. And if a leader is monitoring and not just active listening, and the individual contributor is checking boxes, not sharing successes, challenges, and how to overcome, the conversation is actually not fostering growth and development, and instead stifling someone to, if you're not checking all these boxes, you're not doing good work, and that's not how that those conversations should evolve. And that's how growth happens. Growth isn't, I just checked all these, I checked these 5 boxes and on to the next pillar, and I checked these 6 boxes. It is an ongoing conversation and sharing across. And I think technology, particularly in a remote world, allows us to do that kind of differently. And I think it's important for organizations to be intentional with that technology. So I've been so excited as Simple Mills has brought in Lattice as a partner, because Lattice pulls in one-to-ones, engagement surveys, performance reviews, career pathing. And as we're building this tool, I think we're really building ways of working that put it remote first.
And I see like growth, Alysa's point about growth is continuous. And I think one part is it's a whole person. So when someone is advocating for themselves, it's not just their work self, it's also their personal self. So for example, one of our employees is a great makeup artist, and we're in fashion e-commerce industry where she will do makeup, like her own work and design and put it on our Slack channel. So we know this, and she works in finance. So she's not only a financial analyst, she's also a great makeup artist. So we invited her to our, our show, our FabFitFun show, right? And then, so she was able to advocate her whole person, like not just the work, the technical, financial part of her, but also the other side of her. And that's just one example. We have a YouTube singer. She works in product management. So she's able to show that, not shy about her career, not just the work itself, but whole person. So I want to bring that to like how employee can advocate themselves is not shied about, right? Like just doing one work. It's not just one aspect of us. We have different colors as a whole person. How do we bring that and show our authentic self to work? And then people will give you opportunities, right? So give you opportunity that you will never think of. And there are people who love learning and development, but she's not in learning and development, but she loved to coordinate, help with training outside of her work. And then in a remote workplace, then we were able to like, hey, there's an opportunity. Do you want to work on this project outside of your full-time job? And this happened all the time. And it also relates to what we talk about internal mobility, is about employee advocating the whole person and not just one aspect. And I think people always think about promotion is one way of the next step. In the next 3 years, I want to be promoted to be a manager and director. It's not just that. It's about how do we live as a human in a workplace that we can connect and belong and show up, and not just getting promoted. And I think that's where managers struggle when they're having career conversation. It's I want promotion, I want more money, but instead of why do you want that? What do you want to do? Do you want to be an artist or a singer in the future? How do we help you with the skill you have today and build on that so the person can be fulfilled for their life?
Well, you just gave me, the perfect idea for an individual contributor that's listening. Ask for shadow programs. Don't hesitate if no one's offering it. Just ask, like, hey, can I shadow the L&D team, or can I shadow the product team? I have a keen interest in how they work and what they do. And that builds opportunity and experience. And sometimes those shadow programs can be 2 weeks, but if the organization is actively listening to you, chances are they're going to be like, oh my gosh, that's a really great idea for succession planning. And so let's extend this a bit to make it a month shadow or a 3-month shadow program. And all of a sudden, you don't need to become an intern to start over or grow laterally into a completely different function. So great idea. Well,
I think though, even as we have emerging people leaders and we think about FaceTime, emerging talent, leaders or otherwise, FaceTime, we're like, oh, I'm not in front of someone. FaceTime just looks different in this world. And I love Nadia's point of shadow time, because as a people leader, if you're looking to develop your teams and you're going to have this meeting of some sort, particularly I think about meetings around like organizational structure and how we build and what do we think about, that isn't something that you just naturally develop as you become a people leader and think, oh, now I know how to build an organizational structure and what do we need and why do we need it and how do we promote? Like that's learned behavior. So shadowing trainings, shadowing meetings, shadowing continues, right? So even though we're not in person, that doesn't mean in person when someone would tap you on the shoulder and say, come with me, this is going to be great for you. Do the virtual tap. Hey, we have this meeting coming up and I think it's really going to foster X, Y, and Z for you. Come be a fly on the wall. And you join Zoom, maybe you mute yourself, maybe you ask a question or two, but there's still this opportunity. And when I talk to teams about training, I tell them anything that you would have tapped someone on the shoulder, come with me, do the same thing virtually because we can still shadow.
I like the virtual tap and asking folks or just slacking them or whatever, communication you use as well. Just again, effectively communicating and letting someone know you're interested as well. It sounds like for career pathing, there's both the onus on the individual to really advocate for themselves, but also the manager to proactively ask really intentional questions. And again, it's a two-way conversation. I think it's similar to performance reviews. No one wants to be surprised by saying, hi, like I want to be on the product team now after being, in this role for 6 months. Like how do you make that happen? It's more of an ongoing conversation too, if there's an interest as well. We do have a question around internal mobility. For the question is, should I be asking if there is a geographic salary difference if I want to move from a sales to a product role at a remote company, for example, based on where I live?
Yeah, I would nearly expect organizations to be quite clear about their comp philosophy, but then I will add, it's funny because ours have just gone public, so very proud that it's public, but I think it's completely okay to ask. And if you don't want to ask your manager or don't want to feel intimidated by already having that conversation and you just want to explore it, reach out to the people team and ask outright, if I ever had to, consider a role in this kind of position, in this geolocation, or if it's a clean cut location factor or country, what would that look like? So I think it's okay to reach out to your people team and they should be able to guide you.
I think that's a good response there as well, of just like asking and also reaching out to the people team too if you don't feel comfortable asking the direct hiring manager or the person who's in the role as well. Are there any other ways, Alysa, you mentioned operationalizing just ideal work conditions. Are there any other ways that you all have seen work really well in terms of documenting things well for asynchronous work or effective communication, what that looks like in practice?
I think we're still building it because pre-pandemic, we were mostly, like many companies, we were almost entirely in office. And pandemic hit, and I think like other businesses, we were all like, it will go back to normal. And now normal has changed, as it should. Good, yay. Because I think this new, whether it's hybrid, entirely remote, like how we're making our own future is based on listening to what people have been saying for a long time, that this unfortunate pandemic just shared a light on. I think when it comes to documentation and rules of engagement, these are things we've actually also built employee resource groups, or what we're calling task forces, to help us understand that it's how do we document, how do we operationalize this from our team's perspective, not just from our leaders and people ops perspective. It is important that when we engage in a multi-dimensional way, not just surveys and one-to-ones, but really how do we involve our teams in this conversation so that as we do document, as we do put these game plans together, it is with their perspective in mind, and with their help. I think one of the great things I've really, really enjoyed about my particular organization at Simple Mills is that engagement of, well, what does that mean to you? And not just being told what it means to us.
I have a very...
go for it, Michelle.
I was going to say, I have a very tactical example that I can think of here, because it comes back to making sure you have the technologies and systems to really support that, and helping people become self-sustainable. So I was working with this one startup client. They were adding on a bunch of new people. Of course, people are in different time zones. Onboarding gets really messy to coordinate. So we found that Loom and like using Loom and using Zoom were really good alternatives to just like pre-record a lot of this stuff. So that it saves the time on the individual, so they are not constantly retraining and getting new people up to speed, and also giving the new hire the autonomy to look and reference the documents when needed. So it kind of helps to save time, and it helps to solve the issue with people joining at different times and like coming on and not knowing what to do. So that's one really tactical example that I've seen, and I think it's just going to continue to grow, especially as companies start building out those functions. But really, like, how do you use content in a way that can be repurposed and serve in like very multifaceted ways?
Yeah, and engineers have done this for years, right? They document everything. So I feel like they've used Git repositories and things for a really long time. And so even when they were in the office. And so often I like to lean a little bit towards non-engineers following that kind of engineering way of thinking around documentation. Our people team now has this way where if we answer a query in Slack or email, if there's no Notion link for it, we use Notion for documentation, but there's hundreds of options out there. But if we can't link to the answer, then we update it first. And it literally takes between 2 and 5 minutes. So I always say, well, if you only have 5 minutes, you can do it in 5 minutes. And it's amazing the vast amounts of documentation you can create if you actually start thinking about, if I'm answering a query and it's not already documented, it means I'm going to get the same query 5 times. How do I reduce that noise? How do I make sure, one, we don't get this question again? I self-enable people to find this when I'm sleeping or when my team is not available, or it's annual comp review month or quarter, etc. And so I think that way of thinking about it is answering with links has actually helped all our teams, and we're now advocating for it across the whole of remote. So customer success, marketing, finance. And honestly, if you break it down in small chunks and you start iterating, you can build amazing documentation really quickly. You don't have to, as Alysa said, you don't have to build it all in one day, and it's going to take time, and it never ends. Your processes will keep changing, your documentation will keep evolving. So it won't stay stale.
I love your note on evolution too. I think when I think about kind of structure, process, and documentation, a lot of times people are like, well, this is it. This is how it's going to be. And I can't iterate upon this. There are some things we cannot iterate upon. Like there are some legal things or various needs of teams that have to maintain. But as you get into your role and you work with your team, if you don't already know those things, you will learn them, or you can ask, colleagues or your LinkedIn network ways to learn what those particulars are. And then from there, remember that as we grow and develop, so should our practices. So, so if it's not already established, make that recommendation, ask that it get established, and then be ready to see changes come, because our processes, documentation, everything we are doing should be evolving with us. And if it is stagnant or inflexible, we will limit ourselves before we've even gotten started.
I believe that's the fun part of where we are today, is everything's elevating and evolving. It's not like one part and never changed for 10 years. The policy, even our job description is leaving, it's dynamic, right? Our job keep changing and evolving during the pandemic, and like, how do we capture them? And I think it's a learning process as well, where we are learning how we work together. How do we capture the communication? I remember when we are working on our performance review, we started last year with a new process, and we have Google Doc, like just people collaborating. How do we communicate to employee as a people team? And that keep evolving throughout the months and years. And now we are still not there yet, but we are still evolving about how we communicate internally to our employees. But we collaborate, we work with each other, and we do retrospective meetings. So it's really a learning process of how we are, evolving and growing together. I think that's a part, what I meant by like, it's really fun because it's not the same, it's not stagnant.
Yeah, I think building in room for growth and understanding that processes are built and then they're changed, and a great way to stand out as well is seeing a need or recognizing that you're getting asked this question a lot or other people are getting asked this question a lot. Nadia, to your point as well, maybe we should put some documentation down so new folks joining have that knowledge too, and it's not just in our minds. One other question we have from someone is, are you all people managers? And if so, what's something specific that you've learned or changed over the past year?
Okay, I'll go first. Please, everyone jump in. I am a people manager. I think what I've learned is to help a team evolve. You really have to let them make mistakes. And so I really enjoy, giving someone guidelines and then leaving them. A key part of this is you shouldn't be searching for perfection. If something is scrappy and there's a start to it, it's something amazing you can build on. And this leads a bit back to documentation a little bit, right? So if I ask someone, hey, can you kickstart a total rewards page for us? I'm really looking for like 5 things on the page to get nearly like my brainwaves and the rest of the team's sort of thinking go in that direction. And they are the expert or the specialist in that role. So I think a key thing for me is like allowing people to make mistakes, allowing people to create, even if it's not what you wanted them to do. That's okay. It's a starting point. It's that starting block. The awesome thing is that happens is people become, they learn an incredible amount of things really quickly. And so they become very sort of they really trust you as their leader to keep growing. And if you feel comfortable with failing or making mistakes, etc., it removes a ton of fear, which leads to psychological safety and trust and all those beautiful things. And so I think that's a key thing for me, is allowing people to create and go out there, and we can iterate on it and make it better.
I'm also a people manager. What I've learned and really focusing on in the past year is mental health, especially during the pandemic. Just really, when one of my direct report need time to see a doctor or a therapist, I was like, that's okay. Take time to do that. If you want to take time to take care of your elderly or your kids during the pandemic, right? Or if they need time to, because they're, in the beginning, like kids cannot go to school. So like they have to stay home, like just taking care of their mental health, like their anxiety, and just taking time and not going 100%, 200% all the time, but like really slow down and pause and reflect. And that's where coaching and listening becoming really important for me as a people manager. Is like, let's talk about, let's talk about your family and how are things outside of work, if they feel comfortable talking about that. And I also experienced it myself. I was like being okay. And then suddenly one day I was like feeling anxious, just no reason, maybe because the racial injustice, the pandemics, everything that's going on in our society. So I also need time for myself. So I want to model that. Like, how do we take care of our mental health, our physical health? Do we take time to exercise and building to our work and life? And that's where I spent a lot of time learning about myself. How do I take care of my own mental health? How can I help my team to take care of their mental health as well, their physical health, right? Just whole person, and not just, before the pandemic, which is like results, projects, work, revenue, just those things. But now I really spend time to think about other side, right? Like really take time to take care of you and your family.
I love that. If I can jump in, I was a people manager before starting my own business, and exactly like what you were saying, Will, it's like being able to put the oxygen mask on yourself first and taking care of your own needs before putting it on others. And I think one of the biggest shifts for me in really becoming a people manager was like embodying the coaching piece and really allowing your team to come forward with their own ideas. Like team members, sometimes they just want answers. They go to their bosses to get the answers. And once I started taking a step back and asking them, like, what do you think? How would you approach it? I think giving them the space to come up with their own solutions was not only more beneficial for me, so I'm not constantly having this problem solve for them, but also developmentally better for them because they have to learn how to think for themselves in terms of how to grow their career. And for me to be giving them solutions all the time actually stinted their growth and stinted my own time. So that was one major shift, is like really leaning into a coaching relationship and allowing them to kind of step into their roles and provide those solutions. And then the second piece is, of course, just taking care of yourself, exactly like what Will said. At the end of the day, people managers are also humans, and they have to treat themselves with compassion and empathy, because when they're taking care of themselves, they can better take care of their team. So those are the two main pieces that I would say.
I do think when we look forward, and I'm, as we all can probably attest to, like, we're hoping to get to a place where the word pandemic is a thing of the past. We're all aspiring for that, I think. But I think I will be interested to see elements we've learned almost by force. To Will's point, prior to pandemic, it was business, business, business. And of course, you've got to get things done, and there's learning opportunities to it, and there's coachings around that, and these are all so vital. One of the things that we hear is in the pandemic, we have learned to incorporate mental health. We've learned to let people show up authentically as themselves, have learned the separation of work and life doesn't exist. That is a fallacy that we created because we were actually removing ourselves from the home, but that didn't mean the home stopped when we were at work, and work didn't stop when we were in the home. And so I think it will be interesting to watch as we build our new quote unquote normal, as we hopefully exit this, we're in a pandemic, and let's be understanding, how do we maintain that understanding? How do we keep that mentality? That should, in my opinion, that should have always existed. And we've now showcased this and showcased how impactful and important it is to people. And now what are we going to do to keep that?
I think that's a silver lining of the pandemic, is how do we care each other as a human at work. I think that's a huge learning for me, that it's a silver lining from this.
Gotta keep the good stuff. I know we have 2 minutes left, and I want to be mindful of everyone's time here. And I think there's a lot of good key insights that our audience watching live and on demand will take away from our conversation. But I do want to leave room for one additional question for your call to action for employees or people managers in order to kind of stand out in a remote world and really foster internal mobility as well. We'll just do a round robin of Michelle, Alysa, Nadia, and Will, and then we'll kick it off. But
yeah, my takeaway would just be advocate for yourself. It always starts with being, having your self-belief, having your self-confidence, and advocate for yourself, that even though times are changing and there's a lot of different things that no longer may work in different practices, like just having that self-belief and having your own back.
Lead with empathy. If you are a leader, if you want to be a leader, or if you're an individual contributor, there's always a way for you to lead with empathy.
Yeah, I'll build on what Michelle said. If you're an individual contributor, I think the advocacy for yourself is important, but a direct conversation can go a really long way. So it's completely okay to have really direct conversations and both of what you're potentially going through or what you're looking to be doing in your future. And I think as a people manager, I'll just briefly add, I think in the remote world, a key portion to all of this is if you humanize everything, if you start normalizing all these amazing things, you will have a much more balanced team. And I think a lot of people are missing the opportunity to just see that. So yeah, over to you, Will.
And for me, I think Alyssa read my mind again, is to care for yourself and care for your peers with empathy and compassion. So like even asking like, you have a lot on your plate. I know it's tough. How can I help? That will help you stand out instead of just, accomplishment of projects and work. Is really care for each other with showing up with empathy.
I think that's a great note to end on. Thank you all so much for being on our webinar today and for everyone who's listening. And to reiterate, at AllVoices, we believe in creating that psychological safety to promote a thriving company culture. So you feel like your work is meaningful, you feel connected to the company, and you're taking care of your full self. If you have any questions, please let me know, but have a good rest of your afternoon, everyone.